All right, thank you guys for joining today. I am super excited to have you all here. I'm going to walk through some announcements today and use our slide deck to do that. I hope that you are having a great Tuesday. I am going to be double duty tonight as our operations team is enjoying the weather and having some time off tonight. So if it takes me a minute to switch slide decks, please bear with me. So a couple announcements that we're going through today is just want to let you know that you can continue those conversations that we're having about our speaker tonight or the discussion. We can take those out to our social media through our Facebook page or LinkedIn. We enjoy having those conversations offline as well. So make sure if you want to start a conversation, just like us and we can do that. We also want to announce that we are going to do a consolidated professional development day this year. Normally we have a professional development day every year in the fall, and this year we are going to be partnering with PMI for Central Illinois, Central Iowa, and then us as or in Central Indiana and Iowa and Illinois. There we go. So this is going to be September 23rd. The afternoon sessions go till 5 p.m. and then we're going to do morning sessions until noon. So we feel this split is going to allow you to have meetings and focus on work that you need to at least half of each day. We'll be opening up registration here in the next couple weeks for this, but go ahead and mark your calendars. More information about speakers and tracks that we'll have to come. But we also want to do a shout out that we are looking for volunteers. If you're looking for a way to give back, to earn PDUs, to flex into some of the skills that you've been learning through PMI or in your organization, giving back is a great way to do it. And PDD is a quick, short time frame over the next 3 months that will be needing help. And we have spots for everyone. It doesn't matter what you're really good at, we can pull you in. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself, Pamela Clapp at president@pmicic.org. I also, just in general, want to make that call for volunteers. We have lots of opportunities in the chapter for you to volunteer either on a monthly basis or on a more often basis. We have needs for people to help with our publicity team. We have an opening in our VP of Professional Development. And just as a plug, we are going to be opening up nominations for our election or for our board. We have 4 roles open this year, which include the president role, the publicity, outreach, and operations. Every year we put up half of our board for elections, and those are the 4 positions that are open this year. We will be having nominations open in July 12th, and the deadline for application submissions will be August 4th. So if you're interested in that, watch for that coming out. You do need to be a PMI CIC member to sit on the board, but you can let us know, and there's also more information on our website. PMP and CAPM exam prep, we are now are partnering with Peak Business Management. You can go out to our website if you're interested in furthering your education by gaining that PMP. You can go out there, and we are now affiliated with them, and all the information for classes are out there. We also will continue our education to you, the chapter. There's lots of information on our Facebook and LinkedIn pages. Bobby, our VP of Publicity, has done some interviews around some of these new offerings that PMI has. I know he's going through wicked problem solving right now, and I am getting ready to go through it. But these are some of the new products that PMI has put out that's really helpful in our careers and building our toolkit. everything from how do you kick off to doing those problem solvings. They have no code, low code, citizen developer, PM ready, which is really for those younger of us starting out. And then organizational transformation is a mini cert that you can earn. We do have additional speakers coming up. We have multiple lunch and learns. Our next one is June 10th. So make sure you go to our website and check those out. This one is going to be 45 minutes, and I believe you can register online for this. We also have a Mystic Kitchen tasting room. This is our first in-person networking event since everything locked down last March. So we are excited to start trying out some small in-person gatherings. If you're interested, you can register online. I believe when I checked last time, there was about 8 people who were going to be involved in this. Again, we do have a lunch and learn on the 23rd, so you can go out and check on those. Just a little more information. We are partnering with CPS Network, and we do have a job portal on our website. So if you are looking for a job, or if you are needing to post a job into our community, this is a great place to go. If you have additional information, you can reach out to myself or Bobby, as we would be able to help you in that area. We talked about lunch and learns. I think that is all of our announcements today. So again, if you have any questions, even if you want to private chat me during this meeting today, I'd be happy to answer those for you. So real quick before we get started, this is something you guys probably know if you've joined us before. I like to do. So if everybody kind of throws in the chat where you're from and what field you work in, but let's also throw in there what is your preferred project management methodology would be great. Just get to know each other a little bit more. All right, so we're getting some agile safe, waterfall, no preference, they all get the job done. That's what I would say as well. Yep. Lori, that's exactly right. So a lot of those products that I showed before, that PMI, they have a lot of product, there's a lot of methodology. A lot of that is leaning towards the fact that we have a toolkit as project managers, and that's becoming larger and larger. We can pull from a lot of different things. I have my Six Sigma certification. There's lots of things that we can do, and we just pull from that toolkit to get the job done. So I can see that in a lot that we're doing. All right, so my last challenge before I introduce Dean to you guys all tonight is I would love if you guys felt comfortable to turn on those cameras. I feel as a speaker, it's really helpful if we are able to at least non-verbally communicate with our speaker. We can show appreciation to them as if we were in the room. So I challenge you to have those cameras on. Thank you for those of you guys who are meeting that challenge. And so I will go ahead. Dean is a business consultant and trainer and executive coach based in Central Illinois. His firm, Clarus Results, works with organizations to align their teams through strategic planning and strengthen their leadership with tailored development experiences. He also provides individual performance coaching for leaders wanting to accelerate their impact. So I am super excited to hear from Dean today. He's going to talk to us on the 4 areas of focus necessary for every team leader, which I know all of us and many of us are team leaders. Also, if you want, you can change your view to speaker view so that Dean will be pinned for you guys.
Hey, thanks so much, Pam. Great to be with you. I was with some of you before when I joined for the Lunch and Learn, and I'm glad to be invited back and spend the evening talking about executive excellence. And when we think about the term executive excellence, I think there's a term that's important for us to clarify, because the good news is when we look at things like team leader, regardless of your position, I think team leader is appropriate for what you're doing. There's always situations we find ourselves leading in, regardless of what our formal title is. But I want to take a moment and I want you to think for a moment, when you hear the word executive, what's what pops in your mind? What's the thing that you think of when you hear the word executive? So take a moment and think about that word and what it means for you. Because sometimes we toss words around and we unconsciously associate meanings and definitions and all kinds of, 1,000 things that we're not even realizing get associated with that. And so when we think about, well, I won't speak for any of you, I'll speak for me. When I think about executive, the easiest thing for me to think about is a chief executive, right? We think about the C suite of an organization. That's the immediate thing that comes to my mind. But if we take a moment and step back and say, now, wait a minute, that is an executive position, certainly. But if we step back and say, how do we define executive? It's any role that has the power to plan or put plans or actions into effect. It's things that we have the ability to make happen. And that means that regardless of our role, we have some area that we have the ability to create action. So we each have an executive function. And as we rise in an organization, or maybe we're in a town council or church council, like we're in some sort of a executive role, there's some ability that we have to put plans and actions into effect. Maybe that's in our family, right? And what I think about it as very simply is, what's the scope of our ability to say yes? And within that scope, we are the executive. And what we look at is, I like to keep things simple. I don't have nearly the technical ability that you each have when it comes to uh, managing projects, right? My project methodology is plan and pray. I hope this thing turns out, and maybe some of you resort to that as well. But when we think about the basics today, I want you to just kind of step back from some of the technical things that you run into, some of the frustrations you might deal with teams, and look at what are some of these macro roles that we have that can help us or maybe hinder us when it comes to getting things done. So think about that. The executive is that scope of yes. So what we do know is that one of the things that executives have to do is determine what is important. You see, we are responsible for determining what is really valuable, what is reality, what is it that we're really dealing with here. And Peter Drucker, the monster thinker of the world of business. And if you haven't read The Effective Executive, I highly recommend it to anybody. And I rarely recommend books to people, but it's a seminal volume. One of his quotes is, "Nothing is so useless as doing efficiently that which should not be done at all." So, a quick show of hands, has anybody ever found themselves realizing that they or their team is doing something really well, but it shouldn't be getting done? Has anybody ever had that experience? Right? You look around and you're like, why are we even doing this? What are we doing this for? People say, well, because we've always done it. That's how it's always, I mean, as long as I've been here, that's how we've done things, right? And so the executive has the ability and responsibility to be able to step back and say, now, wait a minute, this doesn't need to be done in light of where we're headed. And so that's an important ability that we have when we find ourselves in that executive role, because we have that scope of yes. It's a decision making function that we have. And so we have to decide not just how do we do it, but should it even be done? And complexity is real. right? The world that you all deal with deals with complexity. And there's a lot of things that can come up that get in our way. And when I think about complexity, a lot of times you hear people maybe use it interchangeably with, um, it's complex, or they might say it's complicated, using those as synonyms. But when I think about the difference between complex and complicated, each of you have situations you find yourself in that are complicated. Actually, most of the time, you find yourself in situations that are complicated. And sometimes you find yourself in situations that are complex. And for me, I don't know if this is right or not, but how I differentiate the two is my ability to predict the outcome. So, what might be complex? Complex to me means there's a low ability to predict what the outcome is going to be like. You think about a startup of a business, they're just starting out. What that business becomes and the size that it becomes and what they end up doing 5 years from now, and if they're even still an entity, that's a very low ability to predict. And so that means the environment that they're operating in is highly complex, low ability to predict. Complicated, though, is lots of moving pieces, lots of moving parts, lots of decisions that have to be made along the way. But as long as we connect all the wires and make sure everything is hooked up correctly, there's lots of things that have to happen, but we can predict what the outcome is going to be like. Maybe that is like installing an enterprise software system. Like, we know that's a very complicated thing to do, but it's a matter of making sure things that are hooked up correctly. And so when we think about projects, when we think about dealing with the people on our teams, some of the things that we do are complicated and some of the things are complex. And it seems that the more and more human element we have, the more complex it becomes, because our ability to predict the outcomes feel like they're smaller. And so that world can be draining. That can be frustrating. We can feel like, what are we doing here? And that's why today I want to spend time back on the basics, back on some of these fundamentals that we can return to and adapt them to different situations. We find ourselves in 20 different situations in a given week, in a given day, maybe. And if we have principles that we can base our decision making, our responses, our approaches, the help that we give others on, that can help us to simplify how we do what we do, the role that only us can do. So that's my thought when it comes to complexity and what's complicated. Now, along the way, we mentioned that the complexity means there's this human element, probably, right? It adds this complexity to it. And that means that we're a part of that. We're a part of this system that we're working in, a big part of the system that we're working in. And we have to have a level of awareness of what are the things that we might be doing that are getting ourselves in the way. What are the things that might be coming up from our team that are getting in the way of helping this system to create the success that we really want? And so when I was looking at the experiences that I've had with people, with organizations, and thinking about, what are some of those hurdles that we might face when we're in that leadership situation? Now, these hurdles come up as individual contributors. The difference is, though, when our personal hurdle comes up and we're in a leadership position, it now affects the entire organization. It affects the entire team. It's moved beyond our area, like that scope of yes has increased. That means as our scope of yes increases, the risk of our own hurdles interrupting our success increases as well. So one of the things we can do is become more aware of what are some of the challenges we might have. So before I put my list up, I want you to take a moment and think about what are some things that you've found in yourself that can get you in trouble, that can keep you from getting the success that you intend. And there's 1,000 of them, right? But when I think about what do they maybe come back to, here's a few that I come up with. One of them is perfectionism. Does anybody ever have that desire, that need to make sure that we've got to make sure this is done just right? Let's do another double check on it. Let's make sure that we've got another eyes on this. Let's make sure that we haven't missed any periods, or we've got the right Oxford comma in there. Yeah, distractions, incorrect assumptions. Assumptions are a huge issue. So perfectionism might be one. Trying to do something perfect means that it might never see the world. What's another one? Another one can be overwork, right? We might believe that for us to be valuable as leaders, this happens a lot of times when we've been promoted to positions of leadership and we've been successful because of how hardworking we are, and people have appreciated that, and we get more of what's rewarded. We think, well, I worked 60 hours before. Now that I'm a leader, I must have to work 80, right? So we view overwork as this positive thing, but it's the thing that ends up getting us in trouble. It gets us in the way of seeing our team grow and thrive. Maybe you don't deal with that, but some people might. Another one on the total opposite side might be haste, like this burning desire to just do something, right? Just ready, fire, aim. Get something out there. I don't know. Don't stand around talking about it. Just do something. And so this haste might be something that leads us to turn in sloppy work, undone work, sending information to the wrong people, doing things too quickly that we spend a bunch of time fixing. Oh, I like this one. And I see this a lot too. You've probably seen this, right? I call it parenting. As leaders, we find ourselves in these situations where we feel like we have to protect our team. We have to make sure that they aren't harmed, or that, I've been doing this the longest, and so I know best. So I'll make the decision for them. And that can lead us to not sharing information. That can lead to us feeling isolated because I'm the only one carrying this burden, this feeling like I have to protect them from pain or the things that are hard or the things that are challenging. And so I take on this role of parent. But that turns me into the bottleneck, and it prevents the growth of the others around me that I need to rely on, that the organization needs. Blaming. This is a great one, right? Well, I don't know. I talk to Dave. He's the one that's responsible for the Emily. She was supposed to have that information turned in. Talk to them, right? So we end up shifting our focus, or somebody else's focus, onto somebody else. We blame. All of these are things that are hurdles that we might have to encounter. These are like, leadership sins. And one of the things about sin is like, we get annoyed when other people sin differently than I do. So maybe my tendency isn't to blame others, but when I see people blaming, I go crazy. Like, this is so irresponsible and childish and immature. I can't believe they're blaming other people. Oh, we might get into paralysis, right? There's so many options. There's so much that has to be done. I freeze. I don't know what to do. I'm waiting for someone to tell me what to do. I'm overwhelmed. And so I freeze. This can be a real issue. It can really diminish my influence and my leadership. The last one that I see, I call it please-itis. We have this view that if we want to get things done, we have to be nice and pleasing and kind. And I was just wondering if maybe the next time you do this, that if you could just, adjust that and use the newest template, that'd be really helpful. But I mean, it's okay if you, right? I feel like I have to be pleasing. And so I end up putting myself in this one down position. I ultimately don't get the things done that need to get done. And so whether it's perfectionism, overwork, haste, parenting others, blaming, paralysis and freezing, or insisting that I have to be kind and nice and pleasing all the time, these are hurdles that I might have to deal with in myself. Now, the odds are you don't have all of them, but maybe there's a couple of them that you find as being challenging. A few of you have typed in some of the things that you deal with. These are really important things. If you've got something that you find isn't on that list, type it in there. If you've got something on that list that you're like, oh yeah, that's what I deal with, go ahead and type it in. Like, let's keep the chat rolling here. And if you have questions or things as we go along, Let's make it interactive. You can unmute yourself, jump in and say, Dean, you're crazy. I don't agree with this at all. Yeah, let's have that conversation. My intent today is to get you thinking about your role in leading those projects. And a big part of that is self-management. It's hard for any organization, however you want to define it, the project management group, a department, an entire company. It's hard for that organization, that group, to be healthier than its leader. So if I find myself in that executive role where I have this scope of yes, the health of that group is really dependent on me. How am I doing? If you talk to dog trainers, the good ones will say they spend more time on the other end of the leash, right? We've got a puppy that we got a few months ago, and that feels a little bit like a hostage situation if you've ever had a puppy, but we're getting through that. But you recognize that the bad behavior of the puppy or of the dog is often very related to the owner. And that same thing goes in organizations like teams, departments. How are the team behaving? And then let's take a look at how the leader is being. And that's a big deal. So, as we think about our role as executives, self-management and self-awareness is a really big one. It's a really big deal. And that's a whole thing in and of itself. And so let's talk about how I think, what I think about when it comes to the four areas that when we're in that executive focus, when we're in that executive mode, how do we make sure that we're investing our time and attention and energy in the right areas? Because what is very tempting, if we have technical expertise, that as the temperature rises, we retreat to our area of comfort. So maybe I have an area of mastery that I am really comfortable at, I'm really good at. And I remember that when I spent time doing those things, there was success. And unconsciously, we get pulled back to those areas of comfort, which then prevents us from focusing on the areas as executives that we need to focus on to serve our team. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And what I'm going to have you do is we're going to be taking some quiz questions as we go through this. There's going to be 8 quiz questions that you're going to rate yourself on, scale of 1 to 10. You can keep score for yourself, give you some insight into some of your stronger and maybe not so strong areas in your focus as an executive. Okay, let's do this. Here's the first one. Here's the first quiz question. What you're going to do is a 1 means hardly ever. A 10 means I do this frequently, a lot, all the time. Okay, first question. I help the team clarify the real problem. Now, this is kind of a trick. And the trick word is the word real. Most of the time, and you've all had this experience, people come to us with a problem. And what are they really coming to us with? They're coming to us with a symptom. They're not actually coming with the problem. They're coming with what they are experiencing. And then they call that the problem. But 9 times out of 10, it is not the problem. It's a symptom. And so part of my role then as a leader, as an executive, is make sure that we are focused on the right problem. Do we understand the problem? A majority of the waste, inefficiency, and frustration that you see when it comes to improving an organization can be traced back to the improper definition of the problem, right? So how frequently am I helping the team get real clear and understand what the real problem is? Okay, that's one question for you. The second question in this area of focus is I share with others a view of where we are headed and why it matters. Where we are headed and why it matters. I had a call with a client in Ireland this morning. It's a virtual reality startup, and they're they have so much opportunity and they're growing. And the CEO said, he says, I'm just at my wit's end. He said, I'm just realizing that the vision that I have and what I thought people were creating and working on is very different than what they actually are creating and working on. He said they're creating solutions that turn out to not be able to be ported over or scaled onto other situations. We're doing all this bespoke work, and I don't know where it broke down between what I was trying to convey in my vision and what they understood that turned into what they did. And so there becomes this gap. And so how frequently in my area of executive responsibility am I reminding people and endearing them and engaging them on where it is that we're heading? What does it look like? Why does this matter? See, that why does it matter is a big deal, because we want to have the ability to make a difference. So what is this? What difference is this going to make? What's the meaning behind this? And it can be frustrating when we know things and we understand things. It's like, "Ah, how many times do I have to tell this?" Well, the answer is a lot. One way to think about it that I heard, they said, if you feel like you're explaining it about 4 times more than you want to, that's probably about right. Because I know what I said, but I don't know what they heard. And so there's this importance of being able to engage people on this picture of where we are heading and what makes that meaningful and significant. And that area of focus is what I call vision. It's one of the aspects, one of the focuses that we have to have when we're in that executive role. The ability to see, and not only better see where we're headed, that's one aspect of it, but helping people to see where we are. That's why making sure that we can identify what the real problem is a form of helping people to understand what reality is. And if we can't agree on what reality is, if we can't agree on what the real problem is, how are we going to build a pathway to the future? We've got to get on the same page right now. And so helping understand the future, helping understand the present. And when we think about the future, it's not just the sunshine and lollipop future. That's one part of our future. And so that type of a future is called the future we want to move toward. But there's also another future that's important to understand and to discuss with our teams and ask for their input. This is about engaging people. It's the away future. So there's a bad future. And it's important for us to be able to look at that and see that and understand what happens if this fails. What's the result of that? What happens if we do nothing? What happens if we, run out of budget or time? What happens? What does that look like? And so having this picture of a negative future coupled with the desired future is a positive, like this push pull aspect that we can bring the team to, because it not only clarifies where are we going, but also gives us a picture of what are the things, if we start seeing them, that tell us we're off track. So vision is a key component when it comes to our role as executives, because people want to know, where are we going? Think about this with your family or friends. If you said, hey, next week, let's take a trip, what's the first question they're going to ask? Where do you want to go? Like, that's the obvious question that anybody's going to ask. They want to know, where are we going to go? Rarely do we just say, you know what? I was thinking about that too. And I just thought we'd fill the tank up with gas and, I don't know, just start driving. Now, full disclosure, I have done that, but it's not the normal kind of vacation you take. Like, people want to know, how should I pack? Should I bring my swim trunks? Should I, what should I be bringing with? Where are we going? And yet, in the world of business, we can so easily get tied into solving the problem that's right at hand. We forget about where it is that we're heading. And take a moment and look at this picture and think to yourself, what stands out to you? What stands out to you? And you might be thinking, well, what does this have to do with vision? All I see is a wall. Well, when I think about the leader's role and the things that they can help the team see, I think there's three elements. There's three components that come into that. The easiest thing to see is the wall. That's the problem. And I don't mean seeing the wall as the problem. I mean, the easiest thing for us to see in our project or in our company or in our life is the problem. That's the obstacle. It's the wall that's in front of us. It's the thing that we wish wasn't there. But newsflash, there's always going to be problems. If there wasn't problems, you wouldn't have a job, right? Problems are the opportunities that present themselves for us to grow and get better and achieve. Okay, so the wall is our problem, and we need to be able to see it very clearly. That's part of our vision, but it doesn't stop there. If we stop there, we've missed an opportunity as a leader to bring a full vision to life, to help others add to the clarity of that vision. Because what's on the other side of the wall? I call it the garden. There's something that is desirable. You see some trees over there. It's like, I don't know what's over there. But if somebody has a picture that they can paint to me, like, this is going to be an amazing place. What does this garden look like? It's this positive place we're heading toward. Okay, so now we've got a problem that is in the way. It's an obstacle in the way of this amazing place that we're headed towards, this garden. And that means that we need to be able to see a third thing, or at least help our team come together to identify that third thing. And you see it there, and that's the ladder. We need to figure out a way over or around. Maybe there's a door somewhere that somebody has a key. We don't have to climb over it. Maybe we go around it. Maybe we tunnel under it. But we have to get around this obstacle. And so, as leaders, if we can help people to continually be thinking in terms of what's the garden we're headed towards? What are the obstacles that we're facing that are keeping us from getting there? And what are some of those creative ladders or doors or tunnels that we can be using to get around that obstacle? That's part of that vision that we bring in our role as executives. So, vision, where are we headed? Do we know? Is it meaningful? Like, is it making a difference, or is it just digging holes and filling them back in? Does it feel futile? How can I contribute? So part of that role, when we think about vision, is making sure that we can help people see the dotted line between where they are and what they do and what we need to achieve. If I can't see the connection between me and what we're working to achieve, it's hard for me to be creative. It's hard for me to be energized. Leaders have a huge opportunity of connecting that dotted line between the activity of the individual and the outcome for the organization. And here's the deal, that wall, it's going to take some work to get around. I need to have in my mind, in my mind's eye, the recognition that getting around this wall is going to be worth it. That we're working towards a brighter future. Because you hear people say, anybody ever heard someone say, people hate change? Raise your hand if you've heard people say, people hate change. Yep. I'm like the outlier because I don't think people hate change. I think people actually like change. We buy new clothes. We trade our cars. We move to different houses. We go to new restaurants. People are changing continually. But most of the change they make in their life, they have some level of control over. Exactly, Kathy. So there's how much control do I have over it? And do I believe that it's likely to be better on the other side? Do I think the effort to get on the other side of that wall is going to be worth it? If I have some say in it and I think it's going to be better, Let's do it. I'm up for it. Let's go. Okay, so that's vision. It's one of the areas of focus. Okay, here's your next quiz. Hopefully you got your scores so far. Next one, 1 to 10. I develop or recruit the people that we will need for the future. I develop or recruit the people that we need for the future. 1 to 10. Rarely or frequently. Next one. I ensure there is adequate available time and funding. Time and funding. So, there's a handful of things that are quite limited. One is time, one is money. Both of those are limitations that we have to deal with, and they're bounds that we operate within. So, am I good at that or not so much? Okay. This one is called resources. Critical area of focus is being able to procure the resources for our organization to do what it needs to do. My project management team, my change team, my department, my company, my family, my whatever, my city. If I'm on the city council, it's like, well, we want to build a new pool. Okay, all we need is money. So I need to be able to procure resources. If I'm leading a nonprofit organization, one of the top responsibilities I have is making sure that we are getting funding. How do I get the resources? When I think about resources, those are, you could say, time and talent and treasure. Okay, so how much time do we have to do this? Talent. Now, talent is a really interesting word. When you think about the word talent and someone says, there's a lot of talent there. If you go back to the history of the word talent, talent is about currency or money. It's things of value. And I think it's appropriate because when we look at people who have certain skills and certain abilities, we talk about their talents. Well, ultimately, it is those things, those talents are what the greatest ability is to create value. That's what that flows from. And so talent is important, both from money and ability. And when we look at resources, we can deploy them more efficiently as executives if we think in terms of how do we grow our capacity to get things done. Now, one of the things that people always say they had more of is time, right? And the reality is, as leaders, it might be that the best thing isn't that we find more time for our team, but we help our team use time differently. And there's something called Parkinson's Law that you might be familiar with. Has anybody ever heard of Parkinson's Law? Raise your hand. Yep, a few of you. Parkinson's Law states that work will grow to the size of the container that it is given. Think about that time where you're given 30 minutes to pack for a trip and you managed to do it. Boom, 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 boom. You got this clothes, got that, grab this, grab that bag. Boom, we're out the door. And then you think about that another time where it took you 2 days. Let's see. Well, maybe I'll take this. No, I don't really like that. Maybe we'll take this. You pack for the trip, proving you could do it in 30 minutes and 2 days. It all depended on how much was the bucket that I gave to this project. And now, some of you may be like me, I don't know, but there are many times where I give myself a bucket to prepare or do or execute something. And what do? I wait, right? It's like the college term paper. You have the whole term to work on it. Might as well wait till the last 2 days and just go for 12 hours on it, right? So how we use time can be not just how do we get more of it, but how do we help our team maybe use it differently? Understand that there are containers that are given to us that we can shift. There's one study that I saw that, the average employee who works 7 hours a day utilizes about 3.5 hours for work. And that's a great example of saying we have let's say in that case, we have a 7-hour bucket, a 7-hour container, and I've got 3 things. We magically figure out how to make those 3 things fit into that 7-hour container. Now, you might be thinking like, well, 3 things. I don't have 3 things. I got 343 things. Like I've never run out of time. I'm trying to find a bigger bucket. And that's the case. But, maybe not everything needs to be done. And that's a function of we have a tendency to accumulate responsibilities and tasks. And because each of you are very responsible people, you have a hard time perhaps letting go or firing certain tasks. And that's the thing is, like, everything we choose to do is something else we've chosen not to do. And so getting clear on what are the few things that only I can do. In my role, what can only I do? And then what things am I doing that I do because I've always done them? Resources are critical. One of the I read these studies about, like why businesses top reasons why businesses go out of business. And invariably, the number one reason a business goes out of money, like as if this was some unbelievable research study, they ran out of money. That's like the worst. Okay, they're talking about resources, but like that's the worst answer ever. That's like saying, well, they died because they ran out of blood. See, it's just a resource, right? The real question is, why'd they run out of money? That's the real issue. That's the real problem. Okay, so resources. Do we have the time we need? Maybe we have too much time. Maybe we have too much resources. I have seen this in organizations where morale and drama have become a real issue because they actually had too much staff. They were over-equipped. And when we're over-equipped, we have too much time. What do we do when we have too much time? We fill it in with things that are not so healthy. So there is this fine balance of making sure we have the resources that fit the mission. What is it that really needs to be achieved? And for me, this relates to hiring people. What I run into with hiring managers, CEOs, whatever, they say, we need to hire somebody that has 10 years of experience in, this programming language. That doesn't make any sense at all. Because each of you have met people with many years of experience in a discipline that after 5 minutes talking to them, you're like, they are idiots, right? They don't know what they're doing. You're not hiring somebody that has 10 years of experience. That's really not what you want. What is it that needs to be achieved? What's the problem we need to solve? That's the focus. And maybe the person that can solve that doesn't have 10 years of experience. So we need to think about what is it that we're really working to achieve when it comes to the resources we're looking for. And then here's the key, like lesson number 1, as soon as you take a role, you have to start developing your replacement. We have to make ourselves obsolete unless we never want to do anything ever. Because what happens in the organization, you all know this, like they look around and go, well, you do such a good job. I just don't know how we're ever going to replace you. I'd love to promote you and give you a 20% raise, but we'll just be stuck without you here. Okay. So I have to develop my replacement. You go on to a nonprofit board. How are you going to find your replacement? Even if you're going to be there 4 years, you got to start developing your replacement. That's the number one responsibility of leadership, is developing the replacements. I just saw a story, the Colonial Pipeline. You remember that hacking thing that shut everything down on the East Coast, right? Maybe you saw this story too. The CEO says, well, the fact of the matter is, all of the people who know how to operate our pipeline manually are either dead or retired. We don't have any employees that can operate it by hand. We can only operate it by computer, right? So that's a very fragile environment, as they found out. And what they found out was all of their knowledge about how things actually work are gone. Okay, next one. Next one. You ready? Here we go. I ensure clear action plans are connected to each decision. You've all been in those meetings where everybody's excited about the idea and they say, yeah, that's going to be awesome. Let's do that. This is amazing. Yeah. And everybody's excited. They're like, yeah, high fives. And then everybody leaves the meeting room. And 2 weeks later, you get back together and you're like, what was it that we talked about again? Who was going to do that? I don't remember. Did anybody take notes? No. Anybody decide? I don't remember. Okay. Wow. Okay. And it's like Groundhog Day, right? And so, how frequently do I ensure clear action plans are connected to each decision? Worst ever. That's right. And here's a second one. This is a personal challenge. I do what I say I'm going to do. Another way to think about this is the do to say ratio. How high is my say to do ratio? So there's two ways to improve my say to do ratio. I can either say I'm going to do fewer things, and many of you might benefit from that because it can be hard to say no. But every time I say yes, I'm saying no to something else. So I can say yes to fewer things. And I can make sure that as soon as I make that promise, I've got a clear action plan personally of how I'm going to fulfill that. Because it's really easy to get rid of the tension in the moment by saying, yeah, I'll take care of that. You've been in those meetings. I was in a meeting a few days last week, and the one lady on the board, she's like, I'll take care of that. I'm like, do not say yes to this because you won't get it done. You have too much on your plate, right? So I had to protect her from herself because we go out there with these good intentions and set ourselves up for failure. And then we have this remorse and we think less of ourselves. So instead of setting ourselves up for remorse, let's just say yes to less and do each of those things. Okay, so that's your scoring question. And this is related to the key, and that's execution. We come together in an organization to get things done. And the thing, that's right, overcommit, well, that's one way to think about it. That's one way to think about it. I resemble that. But it's all about execution. The difference between organizations that thrive and the difference between the ones that struggle is about execution. And you can think about that from an individual standpoint. Like you've got that person you work with that as soon as they say, I'll take care of it, the first thought in your head is, no, you won't. I know you've got that person. You're each thinking about that person right now. You're like, no, they're not going to do that. It's not going to happen. It's going to be late. They're going to forget about it, whatever. I'm going to be frustrated. I'm going to have to come in on Saturday and take care of it like I always do and bail everybody out, right? You've got organizations that have this in their culture. Execution makes the difference. It's all about execution. And the thing is, execution doesn't always mean doing things, right? We might have this thought. Here's a quote for you. This is General Patton. A good plan, violently executed now, is better than a perfect plan executed at some indefinite time in the future. Now, you might be thinking, oh, okay, so we have to have a bias for action. We have to do things. Just shoot something. I don't know. That's not what this is about. It's about deciding and then executing what we've decided. That doesn't mean doing. It might mean doing. We might have a bias for action, but there are times where we are faced with a decision, and the hard decision And the right decision is to say, right now, we're going to do nothing. That is very different than saying, I'm not sure what to do. Let's just wait and see what happens. From the outside, those things look the same. But what's behind the thinking is radically different. So the right answer might be to say, do nothing. And we are going to execute that plan. And we are going to do nothing. That is a choice. So I don't want people to hear like, oh, we just got to run around and just do things. That's not it at all. We have to be very intentional and targeted. And so when we think about, let's say, that startup business, startups are a good example of this. And each of you recognize the biggest change, when you think about things like what Agile has given us, right? That type of thinking is saying, let's do things in smaller chunks. Let's not lock ourselves in the room for 2 years, creating something that's amazing, come out of the room, release it to the world, and realize that the world has changed and they don't need it anymore. What a startup says, taking the lean methodology into startups is, how fast can we learn? That means we're going to do lots of little things that give us learning loops. How fast can we learn? And so execution is about not perfection, John, to your quote, it's about progress over perfection. How fast can we learn? Do we have a loop linked back to complete our system? So too often we do things and we never learn. But the reality is the best organization, the best team is the one that learns fastest. The only way we learn is through the loop back. Did that work? That could be as simple as an after action review. Like, what did we expect? What did we get? What do we need to remember next time? Being intentional about keeping that learning loop in place is key to effective execution. Maybe we feel slowed down because this thing that we're executing is so big. It's too big of a decision. So as leaders, we might be able to say, well, let's make it smaller. Let's take just one piece of it. Right? So if I said, well, I'm going to run a marathon, that's too big of a thing to do. I can't do that. But maybe I can take a jog for 10 minutes tomorrow. Like, that's something I can do. I can take action on that. And then I like to consider the dead man rule. Right? So can a dead man do it? So people will say things like, I just need my students to be quiet. Okay, so the dead man rule is, can a dead man do what you're asking the team to do? Well, if I want my students in my classroom to be quiet, can a dead man do that? Yes. Well, then that's probably not a good request. What do you want them to do? So the focus on action. Well, I want them to be taking notes as I'm introducing the new concept. Aha, a dead man cannot do that. I want these users to stop complaining. Can a dead man not complain? Yes. Okay, what do you want them to do instead? Okay, last of the 4, your last quiz. Number 1, I intervene quickly and clearly when standards aren't kept. Am I quick to do that? And I do that easily and frequently? Or, what's the big deal? Yeah, we say that we can't do that here, but it's just one time. Second one is, I ensure time and energy is given to celebrating success. How frequently do I make sure that success is celebrated? Tell you, this is a tough one for me. It's like onward and upward. There's always something else we can tackle next. Taking the time to celebrate success is a challenging one. This one is the 4th area of focus, and that is the culture. Now, when I think about culture, Culture, my apologies if you're working in the HR department or you're in HR or you have a history of that. HR does not own culture. The executive owns culture. So if your scope of yes includes a certain team or a certain area, you own culture there. And what is culture, right? So culture is really nothing more than how do we solve problems? How do we get things done? What gets punished? What gets rewarded? What gets celebrated? Who gets fired? Who gets hired? That's what culture is. How do we solve problems here? What happens when things go wrong? And all of that is related close to the execution of what we do as an organization. It's not a policy. It's not free beer Fridays. It's not the ping pong table and free lunches. Like those are amenities. Those are nice. That's cool. That's awesome. Those are attributes of the organization, but they are not culture. Culture is what's acceptable. And that's what you notice when you move to a different part of the organization. It's like, oh, this is a different culture here. There's things that are similar, but there's a lot of things that are a little bit different. And that's because of the effect of the executive. How do we fix problems? What gets celebrated? We talked about that. Do we have standards? Have we discussed and understood what our standards are, what we expect? Because frustration happens when you've got people operating under different assumptions. That was one of the earlier notes about effectiveness is like these assumptions, like I assume that's how everybody gets it. It's not the case. You remember that time as a kid where the first time you spent more than a few hours at a friend's house, maybe a couple of days, or maybe you went on a trip with them. And you're like, this is really different. They eat different food. They have different norms. They have different standards. Dad walks around with his shirt off, and that's kind of weird. And I don't know, like you realize not every family culture is like yours. Same thing happens in organizations is we realize we have different standards of what's acceptable. And when a new employee comes into your group, into your team, part of it is figuring out what are the standards here. So these are the 4 areas. Vision. Where are we going? What's it going to look like? What are our challenges? What's that garden look like? What are some of the ways that we can be overcoming that? What are the resources we need? Who do we need? What are the talents? How much time? Do we have too much time? Like if someone says, hey, I'd like you to be able to get this project done in 3 months. Nobody, rarely does somebody say, 3 months is quite a bit. How about we bring that back to like a month? Let's shorten that timeline. But as a leader, that might be the right answer. Execution, getting things done. How quickly can we get things done? What's the speed that occurs between the decision and the implementation? How close can that space be? And then what's our role in fostering and strengthening the culture? How we deal with failure, how we learn, how we reward people. And so my question for you, if you here's a little exercise we can do, and then we can open it up for thoughts, questions, debate, whatever you want to do for the next 10 minutes, is type in the chat if you want your high score and your low score if you want. Like you can type in your high, like what area is high for you, what area is low for you, and anything that you want to share around that. Because maybe some of you have like 10s across the board. You can share that too. That's cool. But typically we each have an area that we feel we're better or stronger or more comfortable in, and an area that's not as strong. So if you want to share that, go ahead and type that in. Otherwise, let's just open it up. And I'd love to hear ideas, applications, because here's the key now. The key for you right now is saying, okay, I've got an area of strength, that I can't forget about in my scope of yes. And I've got an area that, maybe there's some things that I need to turn into an action plan coming out of this. That if I changed one thing in my habit, in my communication, in my connection, I think I could increase my impact. And that's going to be individual for each of you. Each of you have one thing that you can focus on to say, if I make a tweak in this area, I think I can make some progress. So let's just open it up, or whoever wants to jump in, unmute yourself. Bobby, Pam, let's just chat.
Thank you. Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to share or have something.
Dean, I have a question. I didn't actually score. Here's my struggle with this model. Like, for example, in my role in PMI, being a volunteer, I think I'm going to score pretty high in vision, but I may not so score pretty high on other areas. So that's one of the struggles I think I have because I have different personas. Not that I'm schizo, but my question is, so I'm reading this book. The title of the book is "Don't Split the Difference," and this FBI hostage negotiator is saying that assumptions blind us, hypotheses guide us. So what he's saying is we make hypotheses as we solve a complex problem, we can get closer to the solution. And one of the things that is really surfacing up in the discussions from uh, just conversations with really thought leaders is think about probabilities in terms of outcomes and not so much certainty with outcomes. As an example, if I was starting a startup, if we had a problem that we were trying to go to market, somebody says, if you have a 55% probability to succeed, will you do it? And I think in my mind, if I think about probabilities, then I will take the risks. So uh, putting together, I think thinking in probabilities and then being empirical in all of the problem solving, I think would help as a leader. Am I making sense or am I totally off base, Dean?
No, I think it's I think it's wise. I think in probabilities too. Now, there's some good like decision making models and things like that. And one of the things that I've run into with I think maybe I've become more of an optionality thinker than probability alone, because what I realize is I have no idea what the probability is, quite frankly. And there's something called Cantor's law that says essentially halfway through anything, it always looks like a disaster. And then suddenly it's, it's Shopify or something, right? Or it's Amazon. Like for many years, people are like, Amazon doesn't make any money. Like this is never going to work. And now they're like this, juggernaut. So I don't know if I'm answering your question well, but I think probabilities is an important way to think about things. And so let's take this and look at COVID, right? Many of you are aware of this global pandemic thing that we've been exposed to. And we're going to be dealing with several months of finger pointing about decisions that were made, because we now have the luxury of new information, or the ability to process information. And rightfully so, there are some things that come out that need to be reckoned with. But one of the things that I believe it's important for us as a society to be able to do, and that is to be able to say, what was the decision-making process as leadership, as health officials, as whomever went through these stages, how effective was their decision-making process versus how accurate was their decision? I think those are two very different things. Because I might end up becoming successful, having a successful outcome simply by chance with ineffective thinking with ineffective problem solving. And what that ends up teaching me is I must be lucky, right? So I don't know. I'll turn back to you, Bobby. I don't know if that's cogent or not.
Dean,
Mm-hmm.
I want to touch on the resources that you have in their focus. Um, you mentioned earlier that companies are notorious for this a lot, that they look for the 10 years of experience of so and so, right? Of project management, of software development, of all this. And in reality, that's hard to find. And also, number two, yes, if you do listen to this 10 years experience, 15, 20, they're the hardest people to work with because they already set their mind. But that is what most companies do, and it's even harder for you to look for another job because that's what's in front of you. So how do you what is your opinion on that, or how do we get out of that
Well,
stigma?
thanks. Yeah, thanks for asking. And I think we are transitioning slowly as an economy away from that. One of the challenges is it's always harder for people to deal with ambiguity than certainty. And so we have this gravity of certainty around things like certifications, college degrees, number of years of experience, et cetera, et cetera. And so as a hiring manager, if the hire was a fail, I'm able to say, well, who would have known? I mean, they had 10 years of experience. You compare that to the alternative candidate they were looking at, where it's like, they've never done this before, but I've got a sense that they're real go-getters, they're real curious, they're real team players, hardworking, and that they can figure things out. But they don't have any experience with this specific thing. If that doesn't play out, well, the hiring manager is viewed as reckless. Like, of course they didn't turn out. They didn't have any experience. Well, each of us in this room at some point had zero experience, right? And we got here. And so I think there is a movement somewhat towards that, and it's going to depend on the cultures. So this goes back to culture. How do we solve problems? So you can draw the line back to that. So the resources is connected to the culture. If culture is how do we solve problems, they are going to be faced with how do we solve this problem for finding a way to solve this issue. Well, if you go long enough without having the ability to hire somebody with experience, you start, well, for lack of a better example, you kind of lower your expectations and you start getting more creative, right? So desperation creates opportunity. And that's the advantage that a lot of startups have is they're like, I can't afford people with experience. And so we had to bring in people that were kind of non-traditional. A lot of companies are dropping degree requirements unless they have specific, certifications they have to have. They're realizing that they might have some awesome people out there that have a 2-year degree or don't have their master's. So I think it is changing. I believe that. And the best way for that to change is for the decisions to get closer and closer to where the action happens. And as an individual, if I say to myself, well, how do I make a leap to some other area where maybe I don't have the experience? Well, there's lots of ways that I can prove my ability to learn, to work as a team, to develop new abilities, and that could be through nonprofits or freelance work or things like that. So I'm hopeful, but I don't discount the attractiveness of things that are easy to measure, like years of experience and degrees. Thank you.
Any other questions or discussions that anyone has? You can go ahead and just unmute yourself. I know that I got a lot out of this tonight, Dean. I took many notes, even though I have a sleeping child in my lap. So I appreciate it a lot. I know that even I and a coworker were messaging back and forth. Some of the things too that stuck out to me is, some of those hurdles that we face as a leader, the parenting side of it, but also I think too, then that sometimes is hand in hand with the saying yes to so much stuff because you're trying to protect them. So that kind of really stuck out in my mind. So someone said it's time for everybody to take a nap. That's
Naps
awesome.
are underrated.
They're 100% underrated.
Hey, Pam, can I comment really quick on culture?
Yeah.
Dean, I really love your what you shared with culture, and I love the shift, especially I think has been accelerated by COVID, for managers to trust their team members more by working remotely. This was not the case I experienced back in the early 2000 or even before that. I won't age myself, but no, this today's work culture is nowhere near close about 20 years ago. And I can see companies where they have all these mission and values on the wall where we love our customers or we value our customers or we value our workers. But in our conversation, culture really is the value system of the company plus behavior of the people. And it's not so much just behavior at the C suite, but it's more around behavior at the front line. So I just love the shift of the workplace today, and it really dovetails to what you're speaking to.
Yeah, and I appreciate the highlight on that, Bob, because it's a big deal. And the reality is, like, work is too complex for an executive 3 levels up to be able to make a decision. That's the reality, right? So part of what some organizations end up projecting onto their what gets perceived as over controlling is actually fear and insecurity, right? So there's a whole other deep dive in psychology, but I think that the COVID has forced companies to realize, oh my, well, maybe I don't have to continually poke my employees with a stick to get them to do things. Maybe there is some internal motivation and desire inherently to do good work. And so hopefully that is some of the positive that sticks culturally. And here's the other side of it. Here's my last statement. The companies that don't get that are going to see a quick exit of their best talent.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, this is my contact information. If there's anything I can be helpful with, if you want to chat, also connect with me on LinkedIn. If you're a podcast person, check out Communication on Point. It's my podcast, all things leadership and communication and connection. I am so thankful for the opportunity to be with you. I hope there's at least one thing that you can take and put to work, whether it's at home, at work, or in your community.
Yeah.
I'm thankful for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for bringing this knowledge to us. Some of it may be refresher for some of us, but it's still great knowledge for us to have. I learned a lot today. Thank you, everyone. Don't forget, we will have a survey coming out. Please fill it out. It helps us give feedback to Dean and also to feedback to us as the chapter. Thank you.
Pam, I thought we were going to take pictures first, Pam.
Oh, I forgot about pictures. If you're still here and you wouldn't mind turning on your camera, let's take a quick picture. I'm going to stop the recording while we do this.